And I think just seeking information and staying curious and not being afraid to reach out. Sometimes people don't respond and that's okay, but many times they do respond and that's awesome. And then they will teach you from what they know.
You're listening to the Architect My Life podcast, a show dedicated to empowering women architects and designers to achieve business growth, financial freedom, and health and wellness. I'm Aya Schlochter, your host and CEO of MGS Global Group. Our company provides Revit, ArchiCAD, and CAD drafting services to busy architects and design firm owners. MGS Global started as a part-time gig when I was a new mom, but it has now grown into a thriving business that provides drafting support to creatives, helping everyone maintain a healthy work-life balance. This podcast is proudly presented by MGS Global Group. Now let's dive into this episode. Hi everyone, our guest this episode is Caitlin Brady. Caitlin is a project architect at IR St. Ross and an advocate for diversity and inclusion in architecture. She's dedicated to supporting emerging professionals through her podcast, Architectette, and involvement with other organizations like ACE Mentors and AIA Emerging Architect Committees. Caitlin has earned recognition for her service, receiving awards such as the Alpha Chi Rho Medal for Leadership and Service, and recently a recipient of the AIADC Emerging Architect Award. I'm so excited to talk to her today. Welcome to the show, Caitlin.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Same here. So first of all, congratulations on receiving the 2023 AIADC Emerging Architect Award. How does it feel to be a recipient of this prestigious award? And I saw your photos. Amazing. So please talk about it.
Thank you. I'm honored to have received this award. The AIADC Washington Architecture Foundation are really vibrant communities, and to be selected out of all of the applicants, it's an absolute honor. And it's something that I have been working a lot in the field of architecture over 10 years, and I have been very active in a lot of endeavors outside of the profession. So it feels really nice to be recognized, and I'm excited just to keep going and keep working.
So that's really inspiring. I know you've always think of us women and that we should be proud of what we've achieved. But for people who want to know more about the emerging architects, like how do you apply? Like what are the categories? Because I'm sure people are curious too, especially the women. Yeah.
Yeah, so the Emerging Architect Award it really depends on your local AIA chapter. Sometimes it's called something different, but I know that when I was in Philadelphia, San Francisco, and now DC, all of the local AIA chapters had this Emerging Architect Award. And basically, you put together a PDF of everything you've ever done, and it's a lot of work, but it really helps you hone your story of what has been my journey in this profession? What are things that I care about? Where have I, dedicated a lot of my volunteer time and professional development? And you put that whole story together and with your resume and then submit it. So a lot of the big things that I highlighted were my volunteering with ACE Mentors. I did that when I was in San Francisco and again when I was in DC. And then also my podcast, Architectette, which I feature a lot of women in architecture related fields, really just to offer that mentorship to people who might not have the mentor in person. They can listen and learn from guests on the podcast.
Yeah, so I know you're big on mentorship and leadership in architecture, and we're very lucky. I mean, our profession is extremely difficult because we're overworked and burnt out, but you still find time to help the architecture community, right? And we have all these awesome events for learning and collaboration, and I've noticed that you've really been involved in all that. I'm curious, how did you start joining these groups and organizations, and what was your experience like? Because it's hard when you're so busy to even just think about life outside of your 9 to 9 or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, I think that started for me when I was in architecture school. So the first 2 years, I was very much heads down in architecture in studio. We all go through that where you wake up, you go to studio, you spend all day there, and then you leave at, the wee hours of the morning. And I really felt like I wasn't getting the most out of my college education. I wanted to be involved in other things. I wanted to do more service work. And I ended up joining an honors fraternity, it wasn't more like, sorority fraternity. It was more of like a club, and it was co-ed. And we did a lot of events, and that really helped me realize the benefit of getting outside of the studio and doing things that weren't directly related to architecture. I also got really involved with AIAS when I was there, and that helped me learn a lot about the architecture firms in Philadelphia. And when we were planning events and soliciting donations, me and my friends were calling all of the firms in the city and getting to know everyone. So that kind of introduced me to the larger community. And I realized, as much as I like to be heads down working on design and documentation and technical drawings, I also love connecting with people and bringing people together in community. And I've continued that with AIAA.
What is
um,
AIAA? I mean, I know
I
AIAS is students, right?
I know I just stuttered there. Sorry, AIA. Yeah.
I'm like, am I
So
missing something?
I know
Yeah.
I said it twice, and I was like, I don't know why that second A just came out, but excuse me, AIA. Philadelphia Emerging Architects, the Bay Area Young Architects, and then now in DC, the Emerging Architects Committee. So these
So
are all
everywhere
things,
you
yeah,
go, you
yeah.
join the
I
community.
try to plug in. Hmm.
That's great. So I recently joined the not AIA, but
Yeah.
Australian Institute of Architects. They're
Okay.
also AIA, but I was
Mhm.
in I was in Australia and I interviewed the president of the Australian Institute,
Oh
and
wow.
she said, like, I didn't even know she was the president. I just wanted to connect, and she was
Hmm.
the main organizer. And I said, "How did you get involved in the AIA?" And she said, I've always, like you, I've always wanted to serve and meet people in the community. I didn't know I was
Hmm.
gonna run for president or whatever, but she did, and it's her passion to help people, just like you,
Hmm.
considering that she's busy, you're busy. But a lot of it has to do with mentorship, right? And like
Hmm.
really being involved with the community and helping other people learn. So my question is, how has mentorship played a role in your professional journey? And what advice do you have on seeking and fostering mentorship in the architecture space?
Hmm. Well, I think I've seen both sides of mentorship. I have been taken under the wing of some really talented people that I have worked with, and I have benefited immensely from that. Just, when I was working with them directly, benefited from their mentorship. When I left or they left the firm, keeping in contact with them, keeping that relationship, asking them questions, they have really helped me kind of make big decisions in my career. And they have introduced me to firms and ideas and organizations that I wouldn't have known otherwise. And that has helped me kind of expand my knowledge and grow as a professional. I've also been places where I just don't feel like I'm really getting that mentorship. And so I've kind of learned to, if I'm feeling in a rut or stuck, look elsewhere. So look in professional organizations or reach out to someone who might be in a similar industry, but maybe doesn't have to be an architect doing exactly what you see yourself doing, but someone who can just provide guidance or even talk to your peers. What are
Yeah.
they going through? What are issues they're experiencing? And I think just seeking information and staying curious and not being afraid to reach out. And like, sometimes people don't respond and that's okay, but many times they do respond and that's awesome. And then they will kind of teach you from what they know. So I do that a lot with the podcast where I just reach out to people. I'm like, hey, random person, like would love to have you on. And people are more than happy to come on the podcast. And I encourage people, if they don't have a podcast, still reach out just with curiosity and be friendly and just be open and ask people what they know and what they could share with you.
So can you tell me a story of a mentor who's really helped you a lot and the impact that has done for you and your career?
Hmm. Oh my gosh, I would feel bad to call out even just
You don't
one
have to say
person.
name, maybe
Yeah.
two. Yeah.
Well,
No
no,
names.
I can call out I
Yeah.
can call it a lot. I'll drop like a short list.
Okay.
At my first firm, there was someone named Leonardo. He was a design director, principal. He took a lot of people under his wing, and I could see that mentorship happening all the time. Where we would have a meeting, he would meet with us afterwards and have a debrief of like, do you know what happened? Like this is where we're going. This is where we need to go. And that was really early in my career. I've stayed in contact with him until like I'm still in contact with him,
That's
and I've
great.
seen his career grow and expand, and his family grow, and it's just been amazing keeping in contact with him and having him as a resource. When I moved to San Francisco too, there was a woman who her name was Erin. I actually interviewed her for the podcast. She joined the firm actually after I had. So at first it was, and she came in at like a principal level or a rising to principal level. But it was me teaching her kind of like, this is how we do things here. These are the ropes. These are the people working on the project. This is the project. These are the issues. And then soon enough, she kind of took over all of those things and is, she was director of the San Francisco office. Then she's principal, associate principal, and now principal. And our mentorship relationship has definitely evolved and changed over time, but it was so wonderful seeing her. She had this perspective where she worked outside of just an architecture firm. She worked for the client, and getting that insight. And when she would talk to our clients, she had that client perspective. And it was really interesting to learn from her of not just architect talking to client, but architect who was the client, now architect talking to the client. And again, I've kept in touch with her and just love, we have like almost a friendship, or we do have a friendship, but it's a friendship and also a mentorship. And I'm so grateful to have her in my life as well.
So have you mentored people in the last 10 years? And what was that experience like being a mentor to other emerging architects?
I always try to. I always try to have patience and explain things and ask people, if especially if they're working on my teams, if they're maybe like a draftsperson level and I'm the project architect, say like, not just here are the red lines, pick them up, but here are the red lines, let's talk through them all. And then also, what are the impacts of these changes? And do you understand them? If you don't, we'll take more time. Also, feel free to reach out to me. So I always try to be open, especially when people are working on my project teams. And then I've done things like when I was at my previous firm, I orchestrated we had interns come into our firm during the summer of 2020. And they were totally virtual. And a lot of the planning that we had just fell apart because we weren't able to interface with them in person. So I put together an internship program where I was pairing them with people in the firm to do meet and greets, and I had education sessions, and they were working on projects, but they also had like kind of activities to get to learn more aspects of the firm. So I put together a whole curriculum, and I guess that was kind of mentorship, but also kind of just facilitating the internship program so that they had a robust experience, even though it wasn't really what we had hoped it would be.
So the name of the company that you work for is Ayer St. Ross. How did I
Yes.
pronounce that correctly?
Yeah, Air St. Gross.
Yeah. So how long have you been there? And I'm sure they're so lucky to have you really take initiative because of a lot of employees will just do what they're supposed to do and that's it. So talk about what you do at the firm and how long you've been there.
Yeah, so I joined in May of 2021, I believe. And I had been working in San Francisco. I was looking for positions that were fully remote. I was living in San Francisco. We did a year of kind of traveling nomadically, digital nomad type of work. So it was great that I was able to plug into a company that worked on a lot of projects throughout the United States. We work in higher ed, so our colleges and universities are all over the country.
All over, right.
So I was able to work nomadically or remotely for a full year. And then in July, moved to DC. And I've been working more closely with our DC office, mostly, again, on higher ed projects.
That's great. So how many people in the company?
I think we have around 200.
Oh, wow. And how many interns did you train?
So I haven't trained any interns with this firm.
That was a previous firm.
Yes, that was when I worked at RMW in San Francisco during 2020.
Wow, that's really amazing. I'm sure they still use that program.
I hope so, but hopefully they're in person too, so they don't have to be as robust with the digital programming.
So that's awesome. So I met you in Boston, Women in Architecture conference and a networking event. And, I think Jing introduced us and she said, you have to meet Caitlin. She's amazing. I'm like, okay, where's Caitlin? I want to meet her. So let's talk about the podcast and what it is exactly, how it started. Like, I love the name, by the way. So like, when did you decide that you wanted to do a podcast and the name and everything about the podcast?
Yeah. So also shout out to Jing. It was a pleasure meeting her. And then also I'm so thankful that she introduced us, but just wanted to give her a shout out. And we ran into each other at lunch during the Women's Leadership Summit. And then we kept on running into each other. So it's just fortuitous that our paths crossed so many times. But the podcast was something that I was thinking when I was doing that year of working remotely and traveling. I couldn't really plug into any local AIA chapters or women in architecture chapters. And I really missed that. I missed that sense of community. It was exciting to travel and I loved all of our adventures, but I missed out on having a community that I could plug into. So I was thinking, what could I do? And when I was at my firm as well, I was working on a small project and we had maybe 10 people on the team. And I felt like I was missing out, not getting to know the other, 190 people at the firm. So I started scheduling 30-minute, just like grabbing coffee, virtual dates with people. And I go, hi, I heard about you, or I saw you on our intranet. You look interesting. Can I just meet you and introduce myself and hear about how you came to the firm and what you're working on? And it was a hit. And I did about 60 of them over the course of several months.
Oh my
And I
God,
felt,
that's overwhelming.
yeah,
I'm like, whoo.
it was just very
Okay.
quick.
Yeah.
So, and they all, ended at 30 minutes because it's like, okay, we got to get back to work. And it was so nice to meet people. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm seeing all of these patterns of, especially the women. I was meeting with women and men, and non binary people as well. But the women that I was meeting with had these stories of mid-career, how they kind of, maybe dropped out but came back, or my firm offered a lot of flexibility. So Air St. Gross offers or has offered for a long period of time kind of flex schedules. So people that maybe have childcare or elder care responsibilities can attend to those needs, but then also can maintain staying in the profession. And that keeps a lot of people in the profession. I was like, oh my gosh, like I need to share these stories. I need to talk to more women. I want to hear just different things. And I decided to record different interviews and reach out to people in the industry. And that's kind of how the podcast was born. And in terms of the name, I thought, women in architecture, or, there's a lot of things out there that aren't very unique. Women in architecture is so used, and a lot of groups already have that name. And I wanted it to stand out. So I was reading something and I saw something, I think it was like the Fullerton-ettes or Fuller-ettes, which were like a cleaning company. The
Yeah.
women salespeople were called that. So I thought, oh, et, like, a rockette or a brunette or a suffragette. So I added that, Architectette. And it's a little bit of a mouthful, but once you say it like 500 or 600 times, it just rolls off the tongue.
Oh no, I
So
love it.
yeah. Hmm.
So why women? Why did you pick women and, in general, like I also have an all women's podcast, but what was your reason for highlighting the women?
I think I don't want to exclude men, but I
Yeah.
think that I don't often hear the women's stories.
Yes.
And I just wanted to have a place where not just women in architecture, women who went to architecture school that are working in architecture firms that are architects, but women who went to architecture school and maybe they work in planning or lab design, or they're plugging into the architecture industry as an engineer or a consultant or a contractor. My podcast is unique because it's a little bit more broad than just women literally in architecture, but it's kind of that whole network of women within AEC featuring their stories. And I feel like they're not highlighted as much. So, there's a lot of podcasts out there that have a lot of male guests. And I think we could use a little bit more female guests. So I'm trying to help that.
That's good. That's good. Like I mentioned to you earlier, when we talked the last time, I'm going to Podfest. And the
Mm-hmm.
good thing about podcasting is like it gives the regular people their voices, right? We're not celebrities, but like we all have really amazing stories. Each of us we're all unique. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious to hear, I haven't listened to um a full episode yet. I've seen a lot of your teasers.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to try to listen to some of them. So what
Excellent.
what impact do you hope your architecture community can have, or the podcast and the community?
Yeah. I hope that the podcast really just inspires people to stay within the industry and understand that they can, if they don't see themselves in the typical stereotype of, oh, this architect and, what we imagine from our textbooks and all of that, there is a home for them within the industry. They just have to find their niche. Not all architects are designers. Some of them are technical, some of them are code experts, some of them work in business development or marketing. And just the architecture education really is expansive and prepares you for a lot of different job responsibilities. And sometimes people are just more naturally inclined to different things. So don't be afraid of that and don't feel left out like you need to leave the profession. Maybe your skills align with being like, you're a furniture rep or a sales rep or you're a lab planner. Those are two very different ends of the spectrum, but there's a home for people in both of them.
That's great because a lot of times architects are put in a box, right?
Mhm.
You know, I started a drafting business because I was like the main detailing queen, like in my firms. Like I did all the research. So, you know, it's not glamorous to be doing CDs, but you know what? Someone has to do it, right?
Exactly.
That's great. So what do you love most about podcasting? What's like your favorite thing?
I love talking to people. I could talk to people all day long. And I don't know.
Yes.
It's
60
the
people
edit.
you
Oh my
the
gosh. No, not in
editing.
one day. Not in one
No, no,
day.
no,
But
but 60 people in one firm, that's a lot. It's I'm a little bit shy, so like having to talk to 60 people, that's a lot. But anyway, sorry.
yeah,
So,
I'm just really curious and I love learning from people and everyone has such a unique story. And if I could just do the chatting part all the time, that would be the best. But the editing is where I'm like, oh, this takes a long time. That's the part I could get rid of if I didn't have to do that. But that's my least
so,
favorite part.
so how do you see your podcast evolving in the future?
Oh my gosh. I thought that maybe I would run out of steam at some point of like, oh man, this is really going to be a burden after a full year of doing it. I've been doing it for more than a year now, but episodes started dropping in January of 2023. But I am as passionate as ever. More people are reaching out to me to be on the podcast and suggesting others. And I have a huge list of people that I want to reach out to. As far as I've recorded into 2024, I think I have through April recorded already. I just need to do all the processing. But I am just so excited to feature more and more stories. And maybe right now we drop episodes on Mondays every other week. And if I could get it to every week, I feel like I have enough people to interview that I could fill that. But maybe that's a little bit more in the future. But I think just for now, I'd love, I'm excited to grow the community and see how it, impacts people. And maybe there's ways that we could meet in person at some point. But for now, it's just an online community and episodes are going to keep rolling out. And we're going to cover a lot more topics that aren't just architecture, but also include architecture. So I'm excited.
So congratulations on all your success. There's a statistic that there's like 2 million podcasts out there, but very small percentage can go past the 7 episodes. And how many do you have now? Like over 50 or
I
what
think we
episode?
have 24 episodes and 3 or 4 bonus episodes by the
So
end of 2023.
so that's really like a big accomplishment because I know post production really takes like 5 times more than the
Yeah.
actual talking. So congratulations. You know, I'm so excited to meet fellow architect podcasters
Mhm.
because it's a different skill and mindset and also like you know, just the whole process is not that easy,
Mhm.
right? The talking and reaching out is fine, but you know, congratulations on the podcast, and I
Thank
look
you.
forward to, you know, watching all of your what you call this, teasers.
Oh,
I
yep.
actually
Little
learned
clips.
from, yeah, little clips. When I saw your teasers, I told my podcasting girl I want to do what Caitlin is doing. It's really really good because the clips really give like a preview of the podcast, and it's very
Mhm.
enticing to go listen to the podcast.
Yes.
Right. So how did you learn all of this podcasting tips and tricks and, you know, software and things like that?
Trial and error.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do have some people that I knew that I had reached out to in my network who do have their own podcasts. So when I first started, I was like, where do I even begin? And they were able to kind of guide me down a path of maybe you want to use Riverside. And this is where, they upload to Anchor, which is now Spotify for podcasters, of just how to record your data and then upload your data to something that, podcast hosting platform. I did a lot of YouTubing of what to do, where to start, but it's really just trial and error of, are these efforts worth my time? Do people read the show notes? What do I need to include in the show notes? What content do people like on Instagram and LinkedIn? I think it's a balance of what do I have time for, and then also what is perfect versus what is done. And I
Done,
think
right?
this the last year I've tried to prioritize done, like very good and done versus perfect and
Perfect.
done.
Yeah.
And I'd rather fail fast than wait forever to release things. It's like, you know what, I got to put it out, and I'll evolve as I go.
I- And I really love your show notes, by the way. I read all. I mean,
Oh,
if I can't, I'm like, oh wow, you're so detailed. I love it. No,
oh,
it's
good.
really
Okay, I'm glad you
amazing.
read it.
I do read the show notes because sometimes, I mean, it's faster for me to skim through it and then I'll listen. But all your show notes are the ones that clicked on the previews. I read the show notes, and you're very detailed. So that's a lot of work. Yeah. So what's next for the podcast? I mean, how many do you have milestones you want to create, like this year, next year?
I think just keeping, I want to release an episode every other week through all of 2024. And then what I started doing at the end of 2023 is releasing bonus episodes. So I will pepper the episodes in 2024 with some bonus episodes, which will give a little bit more frequent content.
Yeah.
And I would love to feature, I think I have a woman from NCARB that I've interviewed, a woman in the US Navy. She's the Civil Engineer Corps of the US Navy. I have someone who works for Air St. Gros. She's an education strategist. I'm trying to think of the other people I have. I have a CEO of a big architecture firm. That's going to be one of our first episodes in 2024. So just expanding that. I'd love to interview some people who are maybe working more in the ownership side of things or in the construction side of things. So that's just kind of where I'm heading.
So do you know if most people listening are firm owners or employees, or do you know the demographic, or who do you want to,
Mhm.
I mean, because it's hard as a content creator to be like super niched, right? So what is
Mhm.
your intent for Architectet?
Yeah, so I have a media kit, and I don't have the statistics pulled up, but I know that I think most of our listeners are women. They are around 25 to 45, mostly in architecture and design industries. They're mostly located in the US, but I think we've reached over 40 other countries, I
Wow,
think, at
that's
last count.
awesome. Yeah.
And most people listen, I think slightly over half of people listen on Spotify, but we also have a large listening on Apple Podcasts. And just every episode, it's really fascinating to watch. We dropped an episode today, and you just see things grow exponentially, where January, February of last year, it was like, wow, we got 5 new followers or 10. And now it's like, oh my gosh, there was like 20 when, that post happened, or just things are kind of snowballing. LinkedIn is really growing. Instagram's really growing. I thought Spotify has some statistics, and I thought that was all of our listens. And then I realized it was just showing the listenership for what is on
Spotify.
Spotify.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my gosh, it's like it's more than twice what I thought, because people listen on Google, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon. So it's really fun to watch it grow like that.
Isn't that is great, right? Like that's
Hmm.
why I hope you will join the podcast because they have a lot of information on like how to grow a podcast, how to
Hmm.
monetize a podcast, the latest AI tools. It's for me like I'm in architecture, but I really love podcasting too, like
Hmm.
looking at the statistics and things like that. So, who is Caitlin outside of work and podcasting? Hobbies? What do you do for fun? You
Hmm.
can't say podcast.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, Caitlin outside of work and podcasting is sleeping a lot.
Okay.
That's probably in my waking hours. I do a lot of those other things. But I play volleyball in a league in DC. I do a lot of improv, which is kind of something I've been doing since
Wait, wait,
college.
wait. Let's talk about this improv.
Yeah,
So what type of improv? Like just like poems or like yeah,
like
acting?
comedy improv, like Whose Line Is It Anyway or UCB. So yeah, I've been doing that for like 10 years now, a little bit over. Mhm.
Oh wow, work. Do you have YouTube clips we can see?
Not that I would tell anyone. No, I don't think so. Because
Yeah.
it's a fleeting art. So I
Yeah.
really love it because you have to be totally in the moment and totally mindful of what your scene partners are giving you, what offers and suggestions, and really responding in character in that moment. And it's a great way to be totally in the moment and have a lot of fun and you can't mess up because there are no lines and everything
Yeah.
is just, right there in that moment and never again.
It normally happens in bars, right? Or like they there's like an improv night and they'll set the scene and then you'll start talking. Or is it like,
Sometimes.
yeah.
I think I typically perform in a theater.
Oh
So
wow.
I've done a couple classes where we have performances, or I used to perform in college on our team. And then I've done some professional performances in San Francisco, and I'm getting to learn the scene in DC. But yeah, it's a theater, and you like a black box theater, and you go and people watch, and you sometimes have you could do short form or long form, and there's a structure to it, but you're really just taking a word from the audience and then going off that.
Do you get nervous?
Sometimes, but once you're there, it's you just have to listen and respond. And as long as you're a good listener and you're paying attention, it comes a lot easier. Because I've practiced so much, I kind of understand the structure of how things need to go, and then I can just lean into creativity, which is really nice.
That's great. That's so cool. I've my friend did that, and I'm like, never, never. I'm not gonna
Oh,
do that.
yeah.
Maybe, but before we wrap up, is there anything you
Mhm.
would like to mention or share with our audience, or anything you want to plug, or where can people find you?
Yeah, I can plug everything. If you
Yes.
want to follow the podcast, you can follow us at Architectette on Spotify, Apple Podcast, on Instagram. You can also join our group on LinkedIn, and that's Architect ETTE. That's how it's spelled. That's also our website. If you want to subscribe to our newsletter, we send out a newsletter every other week with a new episode. So follow along with that. And I also just, for your listeners, stay in the industry and stay curious and connect with each other. And I think that's when our jobs are fulfilling, is when we actually connect with the humans that are doing the work, and we form those relationships with others.
Thanks so much for everything that you're doing for the women in architecture and for joining us. And it's been a pleasure talking to you. And I learned so much about the architect and podcaster and what you do outside. Thank you, Caitlin.
Yes, thank you so much. Take care.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Architect My Life, a podcast brought to you by MGS Global Group.